Pope Leo XIV just left Rome for vacation, and his vacation home is bigger than his own country. Two popes have died in one of its bedrooms. During a world war, one of those same beds became a delivery room, and around 40 babies were born inside the walls. There's a telescope under a dome on the grounds, pointed at galaxies. There's a horse in the stable with a name that means full of life. And this summer, Pope Leo XIV moved into a palace that his predecessor had turned into a museum. So when we say the Pope is on vacation, what does that actually mean? What does a Pope do when he goes away? Stay with me, because the answer is stranger, older, and heavier than the word vacation makes it sound. Let me start with what actually happened, because that part is simple. On Sunday, July 5th, Pope Leo XIV left the Vatican and traveled about 25 kilometers southeast into the Alban Hills to a town called Castel Gandolfo. He's scheduled to stay until Monday, July 27th. During those weeks, the general audiences stop, and so do the private and special ones. The Wednesday crowds in St. Peter's Square, the long line of official visitors, the constant image of the Pope inside the Vatican, all of it goes quiet. General audiences won't resume until Wednesday, August 5th, but here's the part people miss. Every Sunday in July, the Pope still comes to the window. He still prays the Angelus, now from Piazza della Libertà in Castel Gandolfo, and the crowd still gathers below to hear him and to receive his blessing. So he left the Vatican. The papacy came with him. That's the tension worth sitting with. A Pope can rest. A Pope cannot resign from being the Pope for 3 weeks in July. The public noise slows down. The weight he carries does not. And once you see that, the real question gets sharper. If he's still the Pope, what actually changes when he comes here? The honest answer is that the human part comes back, the part the job usually buries. When he arrived that evening, Leo told the crowd he was happy to be among them, and that he hoped to spend the coming weeks with a bit of rest, a bit of prayer, a bit of reading, and, he added, a bit of sport. It's a small sentence. It tells you a lot, because yes, a Pope reads, a Pope walks. A Pope prays in silence with no camera on him. This particular Pope plays tennis. He swims. He rides a horse named Sale Rosso, Italian for full of life, kept in the estate stables. Back in Rome, he used to go to the gym 3 times a week. He has a body that gets tired, the same as yours. He comes to Castel Gandolfo off the back of months of Wednesday audiences, apostolic journeys, and peace appeals aimed at some of the ugliest conflicts on the map, in one of the most turbulent stretches the world has seen in years. That's the load he's setting down for a few weeks. And for most people, a vacation means getting away from the thing you're responsible for. For a Pope, it runs the other way. He steps back so he can pick the weight up again, because there's no version of this job where he sets it down for good. The rest is fuel for what comes next. And there's something almost pointed about the timing. The Gospel read that very Sunday, his last one in Rome before leaving, was the passage where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Leo preached on it that morning. He said the rest Christ offers isn't an escape from the weight of a life, it's a different way of carrying it, with someone underneath it alongside you. And then he went and did exactly that. He didn't fly off somewhere to disappear. He went to a hillside to pray, and read, and breathe, and let the office sit on his shoulders a little more lightly for a few weeks. So when a Pope takes a vacation, he's also, quietly, showing you what he thinks rest is actually for. Now, about that estate, because this is where an ordinary story stops being ordinary. Castel Gandolfo isn't a house, it's a papal world on a hill above a volcanic lake. The pontifical villas cover around 55 hectares, more than 130 acres. Vatican City, the smallest sovereign state on earth, covers about 44. Read that back slowly. The Pope's summer residence is physically larger than the entire country he governs. Inside those grounds you'll find the Apostolic Palace, the Villa Barberini, formal Renaissance gardens, woodland, vineyards, a working farm, and 2 astronomical domes. A town of fewer than 9,000 people sits just outside the gate. It's less a vacation home and more a self-contained world that most Catholics have never seen. And popes didn't only rest here, they lived their history here, right down to the end of it. For 400 years, this was where popes escaped the brutal Roman summer. They prayed here, and wrote here, and governed the church from here, and 2 of them died here. Pius XII died inside the Apostolic Palace in 1958. 20 years later, in 1978, Paul VI died in the very same room, in the town that isn't a footnote in a history book, it's a memory people still carry. One local whose family has run the same bar in the town square since 1870 still remembers being a boy on the evening of August 6, 1978. He saw an ambulance rush in. Half an hour later, the bells began to toll, and his father turned to him and said, "That's the bell that rings when the Pope dies." Paul VI had died just meters from where the boy was standing. A place built for a pope's rest became, twice over, the last room of a pontificate. And if you think that room's history can't get heavier, it does. Go back to 1944. The fighting of the Second World War tore straight through the Alban Hills, and thousands of terrified people fled toward the papal villas, looking for somewhere safe. Pius XII opened the doors. By the time Rome was liberated that June, more than 12,000 refugees had sheltered inside the estate. Among them were pregnant women with nowhere else to go, the palace corridors, the offices, the private apartments, all of it filled with people sleeping wherever there was floor. According to the Vatican's own account, around 40 babies were born there during those weeks, some of them on the Pope's own bed. To this day, the locals call them the Pope's children. Sit with what that room had held. A bed meant for a Pope's quiet rest became the place where new life arrived in the middle of a war. This is why Castel Gandolfo stays with you. It's a hill where fear and death and birth and mercy all came through the same set of doors. And then, after all that wait, the estate hands you something almost impossible to believe is real. On those same grounds, under 2 domes, sits the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest working observatories on Earth. Its modern form was refounded in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII, and he did it on purpose, to push back against the old myth that the Church is the enemy of science. By the 1930s, the lights of Rome had made the sky too bright to study, so the observatory was moved out here to Castel Gandolfo. The telescopes under those Barberini domes were installed in 1935 and still work. Carved into the wall inside one of the domes is the line Pius XI spoke at its inauguration, Diem Creatorum, venite adoramus. Come, let us adore God the Creator. Nearly a century later, Jesuit priests and brothers still work there, studying meteorites, distant galaxies, and the question of whether there's life on other worlds, all from the Pope's backyard. And Leo has gone to see it himself. On July 20th last year, on the 56th anniversary of the moon landing, he prayed the Angelus and then walked over to the observatory to tour the telescopes with the students of its summer school. He went back this past May. In one corner of the estate, the Pope rests. In another, the same church that prays the Angelus every Sunday points telescopes at the far edge of the universe. The institution people love to call anti-science keeps a team of Jesuit astronomers on the Pope's own vacation grounds and has for 90 years. Which brings us to the reason this particular summer is news at all. For almost 400 years, popes came here, then one stopped. Pope Francis chose to spend his summers in the Vatican, in the guest house where he lived for his whole pontificate. And in 2016 he went further and opened the Apostolic Palace to the public as a museum, the private rooms of popes suddenly there for anyone to walk through and photograph. It was a generous gesture in its own way. But it also meant that, for the first time in living memory, Castel Gandolfo stopped being a living papal home and became a memory of one. Then came Leo. In the summer of 2026, for the first time in his pontificate, he settled into the Apostolic Palace itself, freshly renovated for him, not the nearby Villa Barberini where he'd stayed the summer before. Reuters described it plainly. He was reviving a centuries-old tradition after a pause of more than a decade. When he arrived, the crowd waiting in the square gave him the kind of welcome the town hadn't been able to give a pope in years. Now, I want to be careful here because it would be cheap to turn this into Leo against Francis. That's not what it is. Francis opened the palace so ordinary people could walk through it. Leo is choosing to live in it again. Both are real decisions, and both are Catholic ones. But Leo's choice does tell you something about the man. He's comfortable picking up an old rhythm the church had set down, and his vacation becomes, in its quiet way, a public sign of how he intends to carry the office. And there's one more thing about this estate that should change the picture in your head, because it isn't only the popes anymore. Part of the grounds is now the Borgo Laudato Si, an ecology and training center that Francis opened and Leo has continued. Migrants and people in hard, vulnerable situations come here to be trained in gardening, cooking, and sustainable living, with the aim of forming around 1,000 people a year. The site runs on a zero-waste system, with solar-powered classrooms and a modern greenhouse. One coordinator described the effect on the people who come through as overwhelming. Many of them, she said, rediscover a sense of meaning in their lives just by being there. And the old papal farm, which for generations grew food only for the Pope's table, now feeds everyone who walks through the program. The Vatican even planned to open the estate's first restaurant, serving Italian dishes and, as a nod to where Leo grew up, Chicago-style hot dogs and deep-dish pizza. The farm that once fed one man now trains the kind of people the world usually forgets. And then there's the town itself. Castel Gandolfo has fewer than 9,000 residents, and for the years the palace sat empty of popes, they felt the absence directly. Fewer pilgrims, a quieter kind of life along the lake. One resident, remembering how attached John Paul II had been to this place, put it simply, "He is our history, he is our family, he belongs to us." That feeling never went away, it was just waiting. And now, with Leo settled back into the palace for the full summer, the shops are busy again, the pilgrims are gathering again in Piazza della Libertà for the Sunday Angelus, and the town has its pope back. It's the same square where their parents and grandparents once stood for John Paul, for Paul VI, for Pius XII. 400 years, roughly 10 popes worth of memory, and a hillside that has held a delivery room, a deathbed, an observatory, and a horse named Full of Life. So, back to where we started. What does a pope actually do on vacation? He rests, he prays, he reads, he rides a horse, swims, plays a little tennis. Every Sunday he comes to the window and blesses the crowd. He keeps following the life of the church, ready to answer if the world calls. And he does all of it in a place where popes have died, where refugees once sheltered, where children were born in the middle of a war, where scientists still search the sky, and where the poor are now being taught a trade. A pope on vacation hasn't disappeared. He's just harder to find for a few weeks, still carrying the same church, the same weight, from a quieter window above a volcanic lake. So the next time someone tells you the pope is on vacation and says it like the church has gone silent, you'll know better. It hasn't gone silent, he's just gone to a different window. A window over an old town that has watched popes pray, and rest, and die, and shelter frightened families, and welcome babies into the world, and look up at the stars. He stops being seen every day. He never stops carrying it. What surprised you most about what a pope actually does on vacation? Tell me in the comments. I want to know which one you'd never heard before. If this gave you a new way of seeing Castel Gandolfo, leave a like and subscribe, because we'll be here every Sunday in July, covering the Angelus from that little window on the hill. Welcome home, Pope Leo.